Over the next few videos, I'll be working through questions of a similar kind where we are asked to simplify to a single trig function. Now, these questions are usually 5+ marks. We even have questions that go up to 8 marks. So it's extremely crucial and extremely important that you understand how to answer this. Now, bear in mind that in order for you to be able to answer this question and get the correct answer, you need to have a good knowledge of reduction formula, special angles, and negative angles. Also bear in mind that all the questions that I'll be working through in this video as well as the next few are all taken from past papers, so this is exactly the kind of level of difficulty that you can expect to see in your exam. Now, how do we approach a question like this? If we look at the question as a whole, it's quite intimidating, but we need to answer the question by working through each part separately. Meaning that in the first fraction, we're going to start off by working with sine of negative 210 degrees. We'll then go on to cos 300 degrees, and then the numerator of the next fraction, and then its denominator. So let's get started. I am first focusing on sine of negative 210 degrees. And what I notice is that we have sine paired with a negative function. Now we are aware that sine of a negative function becomes negative sine of that function. So whenever sine is paired with a negative angle, it makes sine negative. That means that the numerator now becomes negative sine 210 degrees. We're now going to look at the denominator. So here we have cos 300 degrees. Now, if they give you a value as an angle, you need to reduce this. So the whole aim of reducing angles is so that you can get the angle to be an acute angle. It must be less than 90 degrees. And how we do that is we make use of an appropriate reduction formula. So we first ask ourselves, in which quadrant does 300 degrees lie? So 300 degrees lies in the 4th quadrant. And in the 4th quadrant, the reduction formula that we use is 360 minus. Doing so, we now have cos of 360 degrees minus 60 degrees. In the second fraction, we're now going to focus on the numerator. We have cos of x plus 90. Now, what I want you to take note of is that it looks very similar to a reduction formula. What we are used to seeing is 90 plus x instead of x plus 90. And since both the terms, both the x and 90 degrees are positive, we can swap them around. So essentially, it is cos of 90 plus x. And what we know is that 90 plus is in the 2nd quadrant. In the 2nd quadrant, cos is negative. So firstly, the answer that we get for this part would be negative. And we know that whenever 90 is paired with cos, it becomes sine. So the answer here is negative sine x. So cos x plus 90 is the same thing as cos 90 plus x. And 90 plus is in the 2nd quadrant where cos is negative. So we have a negative answer, but 90 changes cos into sine. So I'm going to fill that in. Now, focusing on the denominator, we have sine of 360 degrees plus x. That is a reduction formula. 360 plus x lies in the 1st quadrant. And remember, in the 1st quadrant, all trig ratios are positive. So that answer should just be sine x, positive sine x. Now, in the next step, we're going to simplify our first fraction. Now, focusing on negative sine 210 degrees, we need to reduce that. So we ask ourselves, what quadrant does 210 degrees lie in? It lies in the third quadrant. And in the third quadrant, the reduction formula that we're going to make use of is 180 plus. So applying that reduction formula, we have negative sine 180 degrees plus 30 degrees. Now also remember that why we have a negative in front of sine is because it was there from the previous step. All we did is we carried it over to this step. We're now going to focus on the denominator. Here we have cos of 360 minus 60. Now 360 degrees minus is in the fourth quadrant where cos is positive. So that becomes positive cos 60. Moving on to the second fraction, we now notice that we've got a positive times a negative. And positive times a negative is going to give us a negative. What now happens is that in the numerator and the denominator, we have sine x. They can cancel out with each other. And that leaves us with 1. We're now focusing on the numerator of the fraction on the left. We've got negative sine of 180 degrees plus 30 degrees. So that is a reduction formula. And firstly, we know that 180 plus lies in the third quadrant where sine is negative. But remember, we already have this minus in front, so we're just going to bring that down, and our answer goes inside a bracket. Firstly, we said sine is negative, and so that is going to be negative sine 30 degrees. What you notice now is that 30 degrees is a special angle. So we know that the next step would be for us to replace it with its ratio. We're now going to focus on the denominator where we have cos 60 degrees. 60 degrees as well is a special angle, and cos 60 degrees is equal to 1 over 2. So I'm going to replace that. So there I now have 1 over 2 in my denominator. That is equal to cos 60. Let's bring down the negative 1. Now going to simplify the numerator. So we have negative times a negative. That's going to be a positive sine 30 degrees. But obviously it is not necessary for you to show that positive in front. That is all over 1 over 2. And we have minus half. Now, since 30 degrees is a special angle, we know that sine 30 is equal to a half. So what we end up with is 1 over 2 over 1 over 2 minus 1. Now at this point you realize that, hey, our numerator and our denominator are the same, so they should cancel out with each other. When they cancel out, that is equal to 1. However, we had a minus 1 and 1 minus 1 is equal to 0. So 0 should in fact be our final answer. However, it's important for you to understand where the marks are given. So our mark allocation for this question was 5. So marks were given wherever you applied reduction formula. So from our first step, and remember it's actually the answer from your reduction formula where the marks are allocated. So in the first step, for getting negative sine x, that was 1 mark. For getting sine x in the denominator, that was another. For your first fraction, marks were allocated once you got the answer from the reduction formula. So that is when you had cos 60 in the denominator, and in the numerator, when you had the negative sine 30 and you multiplied it with a negative to get positive sine 30. So far that's 4 marks, and the 5th mark was allocated to your final answer, which is 0.